Hello and welcome to the first Addiction Recovery Place podcast. I'm absolutely thrilled to introduce our first guest, Dan Tallman. Dan is the Executive Director at Acceptance Recovery and Counselling here in Iowa and has been providing this service since 2019. So welcome, Dan. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you so much, Chris.
And you. It's been a long time coming, but I'm very glad to have you here. But thank you very much indeed. So we'll just kick off straight away. So tell us how you started your counselling service and in Iowa, and what was your journey leading up to that point?
Yeah, I appreciate it. So I started Acceptance Recovery as an independent contractor working for another agency in 2016. Okay. Prior to that, I would say the thing that drew me to substance use and addiction work is my own recovery journey. And I think that that's pretty common in the field. But I got to a point where I realized that it was a really big part of my life, my recovery, and I wanted to be able to help others get there. And I've also always been kind of a lifelong learner, so I wasn't hesitant to go back to school and did that in 2016. I did a one-year program at Kirkwood Community College to become a drug and alcohol counselor. Did that for a couple of years full-time before realizing that I really wanted to add in the mental health piece. And so I did go back to graduate school. I actually got 2 master's degrees from the University of Iowa, one in social work and then one from the College of Law. Part of that really motivated by the things that I saw as a full-time addiction counselor, which is that so many changes to be made and gaps to fill at the intersection of substance use, addiction, and the criminal justice system. And so being able to combine the social work and the law piece has been a really good thing for me, especially in supporting the clients that I am now, that many of whom do have criminal legal involvement. And so started the practice myself January of 2020, immediately after grad school. So that was an interesting time to start a business. Did a lot of telehealth that first year after COVID. But it's been really great. We've been able to serve a ton of clients these last 3-4 years. And then this summer, I realized that I wanted to expand a little bit. So I moved to a bigger office, have one full-time counselor working for me now. We do have one practicum student this semester, and then looking to hire some part-time help in the near future.
Wow,
too.
That's an incredible journey. I mean, you went from 2016 to 2020, and you've started this amazing service. I mean, fair play to you. That's incredible. That's a wonderful story, and that's absolutely incredible. No, that's brilliant. So what are each of the services that you offer, Dan? Run us through a little bit about what you do and how your counselling service works and.
Yeah, absolutely. So I knew when I started the practice, especially really doing it on my own in 2020, that I wanted to do some things differently. I had been in treatment a bunch myself, and so I learned a lot about what residential treatment looks like, what outpatient treatment looks like, and certainly, through my educational experiences, learned a lot about that as well. The vast majority of the work that we do is individual counseling. I think that that's where the real magic happens, especially in early recovery. The last year or so, I have added in a couple of groups. So we're doing one in-person outpatient group that we're doing quite a bit of aftercare for folks that have been to residential treatment or just kind of folks that need a relatively low level of care. We have a similar group that it meets virtually one evening a week. And then we're also currently doing an adolescent group that's more psychoeducational in nature. But like I said, excuse me, the vast majority of what we're doing is individual counseling. I try really hard to introduce my clients to a different style of counseling, therapy, treatment than maybe they've been used to, especially if they've had addiction treatment in the past, right? Where I'm talking to them about all of the ways that substance use affects their life, right? And how do we improve each of those in turn, as opposed to, you're an alcoholic, let's focus on abstinence. That's the first thing and the only thing, and that's what we're going to talk about, right? I think that harm reduction really for me is something that I've embraced in the last handful of years. And harm reduction gets a bad rap because it often gets pitted against abstinence. And I think that that's a real mistake. I always tell people that abstinence is the safest form of harm reduction, Definitely. Right? And so I think those two things are a lot more cohesive than we make it out to be in the
Absolutely. Field. So your view on harm reduction, so what exactly is that? What would you say is the main core of harm reduction for you as a counselor?
Yeah, to me, it's about really connecting with that client on an individual basis, right? And I named the practice Acceptance Recovery for a reason, because people walk in the door and they feel accepted, right? I heard a quote recently, and I don't have the name to attribute it to, but people who feel unacceptable don't change, right? And so I want every person who walks in the door to feel accepted for who they are, cared about, and really heard, right? And so what I'm doing in that first conversation with clients is hearing them about what they want to change in their life. Now, often that includes, I want to change my substance use, right? But I'm talking to them about, how do I improve my relationships, right? How do I improve my motivation to take care of myself or engage in self-care activities? How do I be a better employee, a better father? Because I think, like I said, historically, addiction treatment has really been abstinence is the first thing and the only thing. And I think it's so much deeper than that.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, part of having an issue with alcohol or drug use, it's stigma. And that's part of overcoming acceptance, I think. And I mean, the clients I work with, I'd certainly agree with that. It's kind of, you're kind of shunned, and you should, you know, it's a whole nother beast, really. And if that's your main focus as a counsellor, I mean, that's amazing, because so many other counsellors I've come across, it is abstinence. It's all about being drug free, and that's the big goal. And it's not. There's so much more that you can go through before you get to that point. And I totally agree, and I'm 100% behind you on that one. So that's great. And how do you find the clients react to that? Are they ever surprised? Your acceptance as well. I mean,
no, that's a really good question. I think I see that most when I do OWI evaluations, which is something that we certainly do a lot of. So if you're arrested for OWI in Iowa, you have to get a substance use evaluation. We do a lot of those evaluations, and I'm often meeting with a client who does not really want to be doing this evaluation, right? They're pretty annoyed with the court system in general because it can be a lengthy and complicated process. And what my message to that client almost invariably is I'm not going to make you do anything that you don't want to do, right? And I think that that's really different from historically what we've done in addiction treatment too, where we just say, you've got to do treatment. It doesn't matter what you think. I think I've come up with a way to write really creative treatment recommendations and treatment plans in a way that my clients are generally okay with the recommendations that I'm making, right? And it doesn't necessarily have to be, you've got to go to group for 3 hours a week for the next 12 weeks or whatever. The other thing that I'm doing a lot of is not recommending treatment in the evaluation, but really telling that person, hey, if this becomes more of a problem 6 months from now, 12 months from now, 18 months from now, my door is open, right? Or give me a call, shoot me a text. And I can't tell you, Chris, how many of those texts that I've gotten of people saying, hey, Dan, we met a year ago. I wasn't in a great place then to receive the help, but I am now, and I want to meet. And that's, I think, where the real magic happens, right? Because you have someone who was given the agency in that decision, right? Given some self-determination over that decision. And ultimately that led them to make one that has them seeking help.
Definitely. So you have people that you worked with a year ago and they've hung on to your details and they've contacted you back. I mean, that just shows the work that you do is spot on, because my experience, very different. I mean, when I managed services in England, it was a very different kind of thing. We had clients that were forced to go into treatment, and the resistance was terrible, and the results weren't good as well. So I mean, that's absolutely fantastic. So when you do group therapy, so what are the demographics? Who do you work with? What are the specific kind of client group that you work with, if you want to go into a little bit of detail about that?
We don't have limitations on demographics in the two outpatient groups, but really the criteria to get into that group are essentially just to meet the correct criteria for that level of care. We do have the specific adolescent group, and then we are trying to get a women's group off the ground. I have a newish female social worker who's the full-time counselor, and so she would really like to get a women's group off the ground in the next handful of months.
I'm sure that'll be really successful, and that's great that you're offering that as well, because that's something that is desperately needed. It really is. So I was looking on your website, and tell me a little bit about EMDR and how this works. I've never come across this. I was fascinated when I read about this on your website. So if you tell us a little about that.
For sure. Yeah, it's a fairly new concept to me. I'm certainly not the subject matter expert on that, but just real briefly, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing was developed by a psychologist named Francine Shapiro, who was working with Vietnam combat veterans. She figured out if they moved their eyes back and forth while they processed traumatic memories, that they got better, and they got better really quickly. And so, a few decades later, we've done tons and tons of research on EMDR. It's definitely emerged as one of the strongest evidence-based practices for trauma. And then in the last, I'd say, handful of years or maybe decade, there's been more and more therapists trying EMDR in different contexts and research and development on different EMDR protocols. And so there's actually some really cool EMDR protocols that we can use for substance use to desensitize triggers, to help people really get to a point where the things that maybe push them into a drink or a drug, right? Whether it's boredom or rejection or even, Friday at 5 o'clock, right? I'm doing EMDR to target those things such that when those triggers come along, that they're not nearly as loud or as unmanageable, right? It's not like you're making that stuff go away for people. It's not a hypnosis exercise or anything like that. But I found that clients are telling me that they feel a lot more confident in their ability to have the relationship that they want to with substances when we're doing EMDR.
So it's kind of like a second step kind of safety thing for those very big trigger points. I mean, as you said, it could just be a Friday 5 o'clock thing, it could be a boredom thing, but it's just those second steps to kind of realizing those triggers. I think because triggers is a big thing to identify. That's once you've identified those, it kind of makes things a little bit easier to kind of accept that as well. I'm absolutely fascinated, but I've never heard of that, and I'm thank you very much indeed for describing that. I mean, that's wonderful. So what? Tell us some of the main problems or barriers that you experience in running your service, and what internal and external support do you have yourself?
Yeah, those are great questions. I think you hit the nail on the head a few minutes ago, Chris. The stigma is one of the biggest barriers to people seeking help. And I do a lot of work now with families. We do a program called CRAFT, which is Community Reinforcement and Family Training, which essentially teaches family members of substance users how to better support their loved one. And I really think by doing that, through doing that craft and learning a lot about family work these last couple of years, if we can change the way substance users are treated in their families, I think so many more people are going to get better, right? If we can strip down the stigma, really have families embrace and support that person in a way that gets them to move along a positive trajectory. Like I said, I think so many more people are going to get better. I would say I have more and more people reaching out of their own volition to say, hey, Dan, I want to change my substance use. And I think that that's a trend societally that we're seeing too. Some people choosing to abstain, especially from alcohol, due to health and wellness reasons. So I think that might be getting a little bit better in some areas of our society. Certainly funding is a barrier to a lot of people. I do accept Iowa Medicaid, and I did that as soon as I opened the practice by myself in 2020. I felt like that was important for me to be able to serve those clients. But even doing that, there's a lot of clients that I'm not able to serve, right? If they have a different commercial payer that I don't accept, or maybe they were on Medicaid, but this summer a lot of people got kicked off of Medicaid or had to renew their paperwork, and that process didn't go smoothly. So people being able to pay is probably the second biggest barrier.
Cool. So you have clients that you work with quite happily, and then Medicaid can come along and just take that away from them. Is that?
Yeah, that does happen, and they did. I don't know exactly what happened this summer, but there was a big reorganization, and a lot of people, they had to renew their paperwork, and for whatever reason, they didn't get it through the mail, or they didn't get it done. A lot of people were removed from the Medicaid rolls this past summer, but I think that in general, that process has gotten a little bit better these last couple months.
Okay, that's yeah, because I heard a lot about the Medicaid changes, and obviously that's a big part of the American system is obviously paying. So very different to the UK, but it's still it's still a very important thing to be aware of. So Dan, how do you receive referrals for your service? Where's your main source of referrals, and kind of where do they all come from?
Yeah, I think, like I said, more and more people are calling because they want to change their substance use. And those are people who are finding me on Google, or, Psychology Today is a fairly active kind of therapist directory. Like I said, we do a lot of evaluations for the courts. And so I'm getting a lot of referrals either directly from the court, where they provide a list of approved substance use evaluation providers. Criminal defense attorneys will give my card out a lot to their clients for OWIs. I would say in the last year or two, too, I'm getting a lot more referrals from probation, parole, the Department of Corrections. But yeah, I'd say a pretty good mix of different, I think it speaks to the fact that addiction affects people in all areas of life. And so probably most people have someone that they could give my card
Oh yeah,
to.
so it's all about networking, I suppose, really, isn't it? So do you go to probation offices and kind of meet other officers, and do you ever do that at all?
I've tried to do a little bit of that. I think it was interesting, right? I started the practice in January of 2020. So the time that I would have been doing a lot of that, we were all confined to our homes, right?
Yep.
And so really just in the last couple of years, I've tried to kind of put myself out there. I was really fortunate too. I did that, like I said, that second master's degree in the College of Law. So I met a lot of attorneys that way, a lot of young attorneys who stayed in the area and are practicing criminal defense, as well as just running into some criminal defense attorneys who are already practicing. And so definitely have a pretty strong referral network through that.
Fantastic. That's really good. So talking about drug use in kind of Iowa, have you identified any new trends at all in the past few years? Have you kind of come across any new drugs or kind of ways people are buying drugs or that kind of thing?
Yeah. Yeah, I think the biggest thing that I've seen is access to all sorts of substances through the dark web. In particular, that's happening among adolescents, right? Mm-hmm. Teenagers are incredibly tech savvy, and they literally can get on the dark web and have any drug in the world on their doorstep in a few days. And that it's very scary because obviously we have no idea where that stuff's coming from, what's in it. Fentanyl is certainly something that's become a bit of a buzzword, yes. Right? And it's something that's really scary. There's another substance called xylazine that's very similar to fentanyl, and it is literally, killing people left and right. And so that I think would be the biggest trend that I've seen is just access to more and more substances, both through the dark web. I would say, too, that cannabis legalization has made that drug in particular a lot more accessible. I think most people had access to cannabis who really wanted it before. But now, I mean, we're I think, almost surrounded by states that have recreational cannabis use. I think maybe Nebraska.
We are in Iowa, that's for sure, yeah. I think it's just Nebraska. South Dakota's going to have it as well. We've now got Minneapolis, Illinois, and now Missouri. So... that's interesting. So it is very worrying about the dark web stuff. I totally agree with you there. It's kind of a new phenomenon that's kind of crept in, and it's just so easy now for people to, and especially young people, to get hold of this stuff where, as you said, they don't know what's in it. As you said, with all the fentanyl scares and all the other stuff, and cocaine's just cut down with goodness knows what as well. I mean, in England we have that as well. Cocaine in England is 7-8% pure. It's just amazing. It really is. I mean, in the UK, the main drugs of choice are crack cocaine and heroin. Do you come across much crack use at all?
I think the reason that I don't come across a ton of like crack cocaine use, heroin use, even meth, is because I'm doing a fairly low level of treatment. So certainly I do some evaluations for folks that are doing those substances. But most of the time, if you're doing a substance like that on a regular basis, I'm recommending a higher level of care than I offer here at Acceptance Recovery. So I don't have a ton of clients who are using those substances. Okay. I will say, sort of anecdotally, I think that we kind of go back and forth in Iowa with really heavy methamphetamine use, and then maybe law enforcement catches up, and there's some big busts or people go to prison, and then it kind of shifts back over to opiate use, right? And so there's certainly some of that is happening at all times, but I do think we have, like I said, anecdotally, this kind of shifting landscape where when one drug is maybe on the decline, the other is on the incline.
Yeah. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So you wouldn't say that fentanyl is a major issue? Well, obviously it's an issue, but it's not something you've come across too often. So, okay. So do you refer your clients to residential rehabs at all? I mean, is that something that you do yourself? And what's the process for you to do that, Dan?
Yeah, that's actually one of the most networking meetings that I do is meeting with folks from residential treatment facilities to try to make sure that I'm sending clients to appropriate facilities and programs. I refer quite a bit to Hazelden, which is near the Twin Cities, the Abbey in Bettendorf, Top of the World Ranch, which is right across the border in Illinois. And then there's a couple facilities west of Des Moines, St. Gregory, and I'm going to lose the name. They just opened a new facility. But what I'm looking for mostly in those is a good fit, right? Because a lot of residential treatment is still very 12-step based. And I have a background in 12-step recovery myself. I'm a huge proponent of 12-step recovery. I also tell my clients that 12-step doesn't have to be the only way, and it doesn't have to be what everyone does to get to recovery. And so a lot of folks will come and say, I want to go to residential treatment, but I don't want it to be a 12-step program. And so really helping them find that program. I think it's such a powerful experience to go to residential treatment that I really try to tell clients to take advantage of that, right? And most clients are in a position where they don't really want to go, but the ones that I meet with who are ready to take that step, it can be an absolutely transformative experience if you go there and you really embrace it. 3, 4, 5 weeks of really working on yourself and taking care of yourself and finding out what's going to work in your recovery. And so a lot of the work that I'm doing with clients is getting them ready for that, right? And really helping them see that that can be a great opportunity. And it doesn't have to be this punitive thing that you're going off to rehab, right? It's actually something that's going to springboard the rest of their life.
So it's all about preparing clients for rehab, isn't it? That's the real key, I think. There's going to be no surprises when they get there. They're going to be challenged. They're going to have their lives looked at in a very personal way. And if someone's not prepared for that, rehab can be an absolute nightmare, and it'll probably fail, sadly. But so the work that you do is so invaluable, and it can just make that process so easy, so much easier than it probably is. So how long does that take, would you say, if you refer someone to rehab from the time you refer them and you've done all that? How soon can someone be in rehab?
I think the facilities are doing a better job, especially the ones that I mentioned. I would say you could definitely get in within a week or two. To go back to funding, right? We do have facilities in Iowa, the ones that accept Medicaid that typically are full, right? Or can't get people in as quickly. And so then it may be a matter of getting someone on a wait list. I do think in the last couple of years that there's been less of that, and people who really need residential services can get in somewhere quicker. I would say 7 to 10 days is pretty typical anymore. Even that, though, as we know, can be a long time, right? If someone needs residential treatment, they're probably not doing great. So if we can get in that day or the next day, even better. And I do think there are a couple of programs doing it even that way.
So what are the sort of cost element for rehab? What's the kind of average cost? I don't know, so I'd love to know myself. Sort of what are clients looking at when they're preparing to go to rehab?
I honestly don't know if I can answer that question very well. I think if you have Medicaid and you go to a program that accepts Medicaid, you're probably not going to pay. If you have commercial insurance and you want to go to Hazelden or Top of the World Ranch, sometimes there's a copay. Sometimes they have to do it differently, where your treatment stay is paid for, but the actual, your room and board you have to pay for. And so I don't know that I would put a number out there for treatment. Probably better to ask those programs.
I'd love to do that one day. Maybe I will.
I'm happy to make some of those connections.
Oh, I'd love to. No, thank you very much. That'd be absolutely superb. So, with the methadone over here and Suboxone, is that something that you're involved in at all? And kind of, what are your kind of professional beliefs around that kind of therapy?
Yeah, I'm hugely in favor of any medications that are going to help people. Like I said, to go back to kind of what I was saying originally on harm reduction, right? What those substances, those medications are doing is helping people live in a way that they can make some changes around employment, relationships, housing, all those things that I mentioned early on, right? I don't have a prescriber in my practice who's prescribing those medications, but I certainly take people who are on those medications into treatment here at Acceptance Recovery. I would love to have a prescriber at some point, to have an MD come in for even a half day a week. I think would be enough to support my clients at this point. To go back to your question about philosophy, I think that we absolutely need to be embracing any and all treatments that are helping people make the changes that they want to make.
Absolutely. Would you say, in your experience with clients, would you say methadone's a better thing, or Suboxone, or it just kind of depends on the person, I suppose? But my own personal experience working with the clients in the UK was Suboxone was a big thing. That was a big game changer. From methadone to that, the results were phenomenal in comparison with methadone. I found anyway.
I think off the top of my head, I've only had a couple of clients that I know of that were taking methadone, so I don't know that I have enough of a comparison there.
No worries. So a couple of last questions for you, Dan. How do you advertise your services online? How do people get to know you online? What's the
Yeah, so honestly, for several years there, I did very little. I had a website, and one of the reasons that I wanted to do that is obviously to get the name out there, but also clients are able to go to my website and book an appointment directly on there. I think that removes a lot of barriers, right? We still get a lot of phone calls of people making appointments that way, but I think for a lot of people who are really experiencing a lot of stigma or a lot of guilt and shame about their substance use, to be able to get online and make that appointment without really much hassle is really important. So people have always been able to do that on my website. I do have a profile, like I said, on Psychology Today. That's a pretty popular therapist directory. I'm just starting, as I expand the practice a little bit, to do some stuff with social media, and there's a blog on the website that I'm trying to put some information out. But really, in terms of targeted marketing, I've done very little. I think that speaks to the demand, right? And I filled up my caseload in very short order when I opened the practice in 2020 and really never had to do a ton of marketing. Like I said, I think that speaks to the fact that a lot of people are in need of services who aren't getting them and hopefully are getting them now more and more.
It comes down to you though as well. I mean, obviously what you've achieved and where you're at and what you're doing is, it speaks a huge amount. And obviously you're very, very well known within the area of providing the service that people need. So fair play to you. I'm really, really, really impressed. The time that you've done this is just incredible. It really is. Yeah. So people could just reach out to you on your website. Yeah.
Yeah. I encourage people to text too. I want there to be as little barrier as possible to people getting in touch with us. So text, call, email, right on the website. They can make appointments. We don't get a ton of walk-in traffic, but that's something that I've considered in the last couple of months, is maybe doing one day of walk-in evaluations. So that's something that I might think about implementing soon, especially bringing on some more staff.
Okay, so the number on your website, people can text you as well, yeah? Okay,
yep.
That's really useful to know. No, thank you very much, Dan. Is there anything else at all that you'd like to tell the people that are checking out this first podcast today about yourself or your services? Is there anything I've not covered as well?
Yeah, I think just that the bottom line of what I tell clients is that this is not something that you're doing wrong, right? It's not something that we need to scold out of you. And so really, if you are someone who's struggling with substance use, or even more importantly, if you are someone who in your family has a family member who's struggling with substance use, just give that person a hug and tell them that you're there for them, and try to help them figure out what it is they want to do and how together you can get there. Because I think that's what needs to happen more and more.
That's wonderful. That's a great way of finishing this podcast, Dan. Thank you so much for your time. Really, really appreciate it. And we'll look forward to having you again on the podcast, another time soon. Anyway, thanks very much indeed.
Yeah, for sure.
Thanks, Dan.
Thank you very much. This is awesome.
Bye-bye.